Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Starking AM0570. This watch is available from Starking official store on AliExpress for €144. So firstly, let's look at the box that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the other items one gets with the piece. So the watch comes in this cardboard watch box, one with drawers to the tray, and the watch sits in a foam cutout panel in the base as one would expect. Although basic, it does suffice in protecting the watch in shipping from any damage, and I think it's acceptable to use a basic cardboard watch box, bearing in mind this is a low tier price point piece at €144. With regards to the items, this is the international warranty card, and the watch is covered by a 12-month international warranty. One also gets this spring bar tool, and this is the tag that comes to the watch, and on the reverse we have the full reference number of the piece, which is abbreviated to AM0570, and the barcode. And lastly, one also gets this Starking branded microfiber polishing cloth. I always think it's a nice touch to get a branded microfiber polishing cloth, irrespective of the price point of a piece. So, with regards to the specifications of the piece, this is the Starking AM0570. We have a 41mm case diameter. We have a lug-to-lug measurement of 49.5mm, a thickness of 13.7mm. The integrated lug width at the widest point of the silicone rubber strap is 24mm, and the strap tapers from 24 at the lugs down to 20mm at the two button push deployment. The deployment clasp is signed to a good standard with the Starking emblem, flawless mirror polishing to the top side, underside and flanks, good foam resistance to the two button push triggers of the deployment, and it opens easily, both halves open, and I like the foam resistance of the two triggers. The mirror polishing on the top side, underside and flanks is done to a reasonable standard. No sharp edges, no burrs, and we don't have sharp corners. However, there is some play in the hinge pins on both halves of the deployment, and therefore there's room for improvement with regards to the build quality and quality control. But on a positive note, it does snap shut with a nice positive click, and the second half snaps shut with a nice positive click. Now this will fit up to a maximum 7.5 inch wrist. I've got it on maximum extension in the last hole, and as you can see it's a fraction too short for my 8-inch wrist to engage the end of the strap with the two keepers. But one detail I like about this strap is, if you look closely at the keepers, one of them floats up and down the strap as one would expect, but the first keeper is actually held into position by two nubs. There's two nubs on either side of the flanks, and the keeper engages between the two nubs, and that prevents the first keeper sliding out of position. So this is very good design, and Starking deserve credit for it. So with regards to the rest of the specification, we have a curved Hardlex crystal. Now this is a clear cost-cutting measure. Hardlex is really a compromise between mineral crystal and sapphire crystal. At €144, the price point of this piece, one would clearly expect to see sapphire crystal with clear AR coating on the underside. And Hardlex is really mineral crystal which has been chemically treated to make it more scratch resistant, but in reality it's not as hard and scratch resistant as sapphire. And the problem with the lack of AR coating, as you can see, is because of its curved profile, it is highly reflective. There is a lot of glare, and because it's a thick crystal, as you can see, we also get distortion. Now the distortion isn't as bad as a single domed sapphire crystal, but however the curved tonneau shape of the case and crystal means that the Hardlex does distort. So the clarity isn't as good as a sapphire crystal with AR coating, and although Hardlex is arguably more scratch resistant than mineral crystal, I would prefer to see sapphire crystal at this price point. The legibility of the skeletonized dial is poor, and also the legibility of the skeletonized hands. Now they haven't loomed the tips of the hands with Lume. I think they should have used hands which are fully loomed, because that would improve the legibility, it would improve the contrast against the skeletonized dial. They have used applied indices in the skeletonized chaptering, but again they could have enlarged the indices to make the legibility better. On a positive note, the proportions of the hands are correct. The minute hand and hour hand are different lengths, and therefore one can clearly differentiate between the two. So the skeletonized dial is aesthetically pleasing. If you like this style of watch, one could call it an homage to a Richard Mille, because it does have a very similar case shape to Richard Mille pieces. But I think the colour tone of the skeletonized dial, which is a anthracite grey, they really should have made it lighter, and that would have made a better contrast between the silver mirror polished hands and also the skeletonized dial itself. The symmetry of the applied indices is good, they're mirror polished, but I really think they're under proportions, and therefore the legibility is poor with the absence of AR coating. With regards to the finishing to the head of the piece, it's a tonneau case. The mirror polishing is done to a good standard. The bevels are well executed, well polished. Now we have a matte speed blasted effect to the flanks. I think this would look better if they hadn't embossed starking and they just made the flanks with horizontal lines, or alternatively brush satin finish them, because the matte bead blasted effect isn't finished to a very high standard, although it is acceptable. No sharp edges, and the tips to the lugs don't have any sharp corners or sharp edges. So the quality of the mirror polishing is good, but the quality of the brush satin finishing on the top of the case, on the bezel, there is room for improvement. So I'll show you the case back. We have a screwed down exhibition case back which provides an effective hermetic seal to 30 metres. Now again, this is a cost cutting measure. 30 metres of water resistance is weak specification. Really the industry standard, even with a push-pull crown, is 50 metres. So to see 30 metres of water resistance on a piece that costs €144 is a disappointment. The screwed down exhibition case back is glazed with mineral crystal, and it does a good job of displaying the movement used, which is the Starking Caliber SK 1868 automatic. Right, so let's test the push-pull crown execution. So knurled finish, push-pull crown, as you can see, and it has facets on it which make it a hexagon, and mirror polished domed cap and engraved with the Starking emblem to an acceptable standard. So it has a red rubber O-ring in the centre section of the hex profile to it. So let's test the action. As it's a push-pull crown in the closed position, one can manually wind the Starking Caliber SK 1868 automatic to top it up to its maximum 40-hour power reserve. Now it doesn't feel smooth and pleasant to manually wind. I'll put this into perspective. A Miyota 8215 or a Seiko NH35A, which you'll be familiar with, they are smoother to manually wind. This just feels gritty, it just doesn't feel silky smooth, and one can feel the resistance in the mainspring gradually building up, but it just doesn't feel smooth to manually wind. It feels like a grinding sensation of the crown rubbing against the end of the crown tube, so one can feel the O-ring inside the crown rubbing against the end of the stainless steel crown tube, so it's not a pleasant sensation. Putting it out to the first click position is the final click position, and we're now in the time setting position. Now the negative of this Starking Caliber SK 1868 is it does not have hacking. If you look at the contrasting red second hand, I'm now in the time setting position, as you can see, and the second hand continues to sweep around the dial, so this movement does not hack. One cannot set the time precisely to the second, which is a flaw. Now, in the time setting position, there is a lot of backplay, and I'll put this backplay into perspective. Now, if you look closely, that's how much backplay we've got in the movements. I'm rotating the crown clockwise and anti-clockwise, as you can see, but if you look at the minute hand when I rotate the crown, it's not responding. So there is significant backplay. This is worse than a Miyota 8215, which is known for having backplay. I've demonstrated it in my reviews, but that is significant. So the problem with this is one has to rotate the crown more clockwise and anti-clockwise to pick up the slack, and it's actually difficult to set the time precisely, set the minute hand where you want it, because the crown, as you can see, has that significant backplay. It wobbles. So there's room for improvement with regards to the Caliber SK 1868. With regards to the quality control, builds quality, and the execution of the gearing, as you can see, it's a very slack movement, and I dislike that about it. I regard the Miyota 8215, which is a basic movement, to be high quality, even though it has backplay, because it's not as excessive as this. Pushing it back in continues the movement, and it doesn't stop, doesn't have hacking, but we're now reinstating the hermetic seal. 30 metres again is very disappointing. I appreciate this is a push-pull crown, not a screw-down crown, but at €144, one would expect to see 50 metres, and one would also expect to see a screw-down crown. I think this is disappointing. So it works okay, although it's not pleasant to manually wind, and we have significant backplay, so there is room for improvement. Right, so I'll give you a wrist shot, and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. So as I've deployed, I've got the deployment on maximum extension, I'm in the last hole in the strap. Now on a positive note, I can slide my index finger underneath the deployant and strap, so this will fit up to a 7.5 inch wrist, but as you can see, if you have an 8 inch wrist, the strap will be too short to engage in both of the rubber keepers, so 7.5 really is the maximum. On a positive note, the Richard Mille style strap, which has vents in it, is very comfortable. It's soft silicone rubber, so it does flex very well around the wrist. It's softer than FKM fluorine rubber, alternatively vulcanized rubber. Nice matte finish to it. It is smooth on the underside, and the taper is good. For a 41mm head of the piece, the taper is 24 down to 20, so it has a nice gradual taper, which isn't too aggressive. Now, it does wear with wrist presence at 41mm. 49.5 is too long. They should have made the lug-to-lug, the perfect lug-to-lug measurement, which is 48. This is 1.5mm too long. And straight away I'm going to say, if you're a collector with a smaller wrist of 6 to 7 inches, you'll find this case to be far too long. They should have made it 48, and therefore it would fit collectors with a 6 to 7 inch wrist and 7 to 8 inch wrist respectively. It's a top-heavy piece, 13.7mm, so it's going to be more difficult to slip underneath the shirt cuff if you wear business shirts. Anything under 13mm is the sweet spot. At 13.7, this is too tall and too long. 106 grams, so although it does wear with wrist presence, it's a deceptively light piece, and 106 is comfortable to wear for long periods of time, such as 8 to 12 hours per day, although it does feel top-heavy on the silicone rubber strap. Really, the worst aspect of this piece is the lack of legibility. As you can see, the Hardlex crystal with no AR coating means it's very shiny and reflective, and it's also a very thick crystal because, as you can see, we get distortion on it, which one shouldn't get with a double dome sapphire crystal. This is curved on the underside and the top side of the Hardlex crystal, and the curve on the underside should reduce the distortion, but due to the thickness of the crystal, one does get a lot of distortion. The skeletonized dial and mirror polished hands really have poor legibility, so had this piece used sapphire crystal with AR coating, it really would enhance it. So comfortable piece to wear, although it's top heavy due to the lack of heft at 106 grams, but really only suitable for collectors with a larger wrist of 7 to 8 inches due to the long lug-to-lug measurement of 49.5. Right, so let's do a Lume test and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge up to the absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, they've clearly used 3 to 4 layers of Luminova. This is green Luminova, we're not looking at C3 Super Luminova, so it's another cost-cutting measure. And this is a cost-cutting measure in the wrong area. They've used a deployant clasp, for example. Now, they could have used the cost-cutting measure of using a buckle and tang rather than a 2-button push deployant. And then the cost-cutting measure on the clasp would have meant they could have spent more on the Lume. They could have used C3 Super Luminova. If you look at the skeletonized hands, you can see it's 2 to 3 layers, which is now immediately beginning to fade to nothing. And although the applied indices clearly have more layers of Luminova, on the skeletonized hands it is negligible performance. This is very poor performance. So disappointing. Initially there's a good colour match between the applied indices and the skeletonized hands, but they quickly fade to nothing, so really there's no point in having poor quality Lume on the hands like this. The indices are glowing better. The symmetry of the applied indices is good, so it's just a shame they didn't fully Lume the hands rather than skeletonizing them, and I think this is wholly unacceptable for a piece that costs €144. Right, so let's discuss the movement used. Now, this uses the Starking caliber SK1868, which is made by Starking. So it's an automatic, 25 joules, 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. 40-hour power reserve is perfectly acceptable. I wasn't able to find out the stated accuracy of this. Starking keep that private, it's not in the public domain, and I can't find out the reliability of it. As yet it's an unproven movement, so there's a question mark over the reliability of the caliber SK1868. I can't tell you that it's a reliable, well-proven workhorse movement because it hasn't been in service long enough and there aren't any reliability reports in the public domain. What I can tell you is this one is running consistently at plus 16 seconds per day when fully wound to its maximum 40-hour power reserve. Plus 16 is too fast, it's wholly unacceptable. At €144, one would expect a piece to have a movement running within plus or minus 10 seconds per day. Plus 16 is far too fast. Now the negative, as I've detailed, is this movement does not have hacking. The other negative is it is unidirectional winding. The rotor has to spin anti-clockwise in order to wind the movement automatically. When the rotor spins clockwise, it has negligible winding effect, and therefore the calibre SK1868 is an inefficient movement because it doesn't have a bidirectional winding rotor. So lack of hacking and also unidirectional winding, question mark over the reliability of the movements, and it feels very gritty to manually wind, so it's not a pleasant movement to use, and we have significant backplay when setting the time. As I've detailed, the crown rotates clockwise and anti-clockwise without the minute hand responding. It's a shame that Starking didn't use a higher grade of movements. Even if they'd used a low grade of Miyota calibers such as the 8215, that would have been a better option than this. I appreciate it's a skeletonized dial with an exhibition caseback, therefore they wanted to use a skeletonized movement. But I think they should have used either a Miyota 8215 or alternatively a Seiko NH38, because this isn't a date complication piece. Even though it's skeletonized, a higher grade of movement would have been better at €144. Yes, it is a selling point from their perspective to be able to say this is a Starking caliber SK1868, but it's a low quality movement and I dislike it for that reason. So last I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet two criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So price point is €144. I consider the quality to be okay, but I consider the value to be poor. There are better options at €144. The lack of AR coating, the cost-cutting measure of Hardlex versus Sapphire, 30 meters is weak specification, backplay in the crown, poor quality Luminova on the hands, and also we have the issues with the movements because it doesn't have hacking and the accuracy is poor at plus 16 seconds per day with a question mark over the reliability. So it's a disappointing piece overall. I think there are better options. I think Sega Design are producing better quality Richard Mille style watches, and yes, they're more expensive, but it is worth paying the additional premium because they have a better quality movement without these issues, such as the backplay in the crown when setting the time, and also the movements have hacking, and they use sapphire crystal versus Hardlex without AR coating. So overall, this is a poor value piece, although the quality is okay at €144. So for that reason, I can't recommend it to you for consideration. I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Starking AM0570. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.